Women are playing an extraordinary role in support for Ukraine by raising awareness of its cause in their host countries and within the international community. Anastasiia Marushevska is a Ukrainian communications expert, speaker, writer, and traveler. Like many Ukrainians, she is involved in a whole range of initiatives to support the war efforts and to raise awareness of Ukraine as a culture and a voice within the world. She is communications lead at Ukrainer and co-founder at PR Army and Where Are Our People? Welcome to the Silicon Curtain podcast. If you enjoy the material we create, then please like and subscribe to help boost the popularity of our videos on YouTube. Also, do watch our incredible videos of many Ukrainian experts. We now have one of the largest collections of Ukrainian voices in English on the web. Anastasiia, welcome to the channel.
Hi, great to be here.
Well, before we start with the war, let's talk about your life before the war. I mean, how did you fill your time? What is your expertise before this all began?
Well, so I like to start telling my story with the fact that I was born months after Ukraine gained independence. And I find this very symbolical because I'm literally a child of independent Ukraine. And I've never experienced somehow this, I never had even like this USSR passport as many of my friends, for example, my brother had. And before the full-scale invasion, I was in communications. This is what I do. This is what I have been doing for like more than 12 years. And I worked in many different sectors. I worked with commercial projects, and I worked as well with many cultural initiatives and sometimes with government initiatives. And I also, for many years, teach copywriting, and I teach global marketing communications. So basically, strategic communications is my main expertise, and this is what I'm now implementing the most in my work for Ukraine. And I used to live, like, I would say that I'm this example of modern Ukrainian woman. Yeah, like I lived in different countries. I traveled a lot. I worked online. I actually live in Indonesia for several years, even before the full-scale invasion. So I have this very specific life circulation. And Ukraine for me, like when it's all started, there was nothing else. I could not imagine myself doing something else. Like this is all that matters. And that's why, yeah, now I do what I do. We used to, I was always interested the most in cultural and historical topics, I would say, and as well as helping, for example, to build the touristic brand of Ukraine. I worked with Ministry of Foreign Affairs on this, and as well as with Ukrainian Institute on promoting some of the cultural sides of Ukraine. And this was always, I found it very important because I always felt like the world does not understand how I call it Ukrainian context. What it means is when something is built upon not lies, but clear absence of knowledge. And it's not even stereotypes. It's just building something without, not on the ground, just in thin air. And these I found always very insulting and also unprofessional, especially when it comes to someone who works in journalism or reporters who were doing this. And now the full-scale war gave the possibility to speak about it.
It's a shame, isn't it, that it's taken a war for people to really understand not only that there's something called Ukrainian culture and that it's extremely distinct from Russian culture, literature, physical culture, whether it's sort of clothing, dance, etc., music, but the war has nonetheless projected Ukraine into the consciousness of the world in a way that hasn't happened for many decades, if not ever.
Yeah, I think it started a little bit since Maidan Revolution, because I would not say that people started understanding Ukrainian context, but they started seeing that, okay, these people are fighting for democracy. And I think this is one of the subjects that when I talk to like international colleagues, for example, this idea of fighting for democracy and for freedom and for independence that you, for example, as a French man or British man already have, this is what we're going through. And I think that this is some kind of values that easy to relate to. But because Ukraine was, as Timothy Schneider said, like talking about Ukraine without Ukraine. Yeah, it's like it existed before and it still exists, actually. And sometimes it's due to the fact that this is how media in a specific country work. Yeah, for example, if you work with French media, French TV, they do not invite Ukrainian experts, and you can shoot them in the head, but this is not happening. And so you need to find other ways to penetrate like French mind with Ukrainian expertise. But it took a war to understand it, unfortunately, yes. But you know, I think and at some way it's a correct moment, because it's not only the world who are starting to understand stuff about Ukraine, it's also Ukrainians. Because now they can see themselves from outside, I would say. Because before, I think this feeling of that we're alone here was very frustrating. And now when you see, like Ukrainians can see that the whole world is fascinated, and that we actually, things that we have, they have not just the meaning in between ourselves, but it has a global value. And I think like our works of art, it's a part of civilization. It's not just a spot on the map. And I think it's pity that it's happening only now, but it is happening at least at some level.
And there's another interesting difference. I mean, this won't be true for everybody, but you know, until February this year, if you ask most people, have you ever met a Ukrainian? You know, they wouldn't have physically actually met somebody in real life ever. Now the Ukrainians in all our schools. There's a village near where I live, which is in Oxfordshire, and you go there on a Friday night, and there's 2 Ukrainians working in the bar. There's several, usually a dozen Ukrainians with their families at different tables, kids running around. You hear Ukrainian, you hear Russian spoken everywhere, and it's just an extraordinary sort of you know, suddenly it makes it real, seeing that human face, seeing that you know, they're people that are exactly the same as us, and they've got the same expectations. You know, many of them would have left lifestyles that are not dissimilar from ours. So again, it breaks the usual paradigm of refugees who are victims and who you can kind of go, but to an extent, you know, you always have this part of your brain where they're not the same as us, and they're fleeing, you know, economic circumstances, whatever. Whether it's conscious or unconscious, you can kind of sort of dismiss it and put it in the kind of victimhood kind of box. Ukraine's, and I'm going to talk about this from a PR point of view in a minute, because I think it's a very difficult thing to project, isn't it? You know, because when you fall into victimhood, you may get less support than if you're seen as the underdog, than if you're seen as strong, fighting back, and so on. So we'll talk about the PR aspect of that in a minute. But I mean, is that something that's impressed you, the sort of resilience and strength of Ukrainians at home, but also abroad as well?
Well, of course, I'm also, you know, since I've been traveling, and I was very often the only person that people seen from Ukraine, because I was going, like, for example, to Mexico, I was going to Vietnam or Myanmar or Thailand, and like sometimes they didn't even hear about the country Ukraine, which for me was always like, well, it's okay if you don't know, just please don't call me Russian. You know, this is a different story. But they rarely believed me when I said that I am Ukraine. Yeah, you can see me. I live in Kyiv. Most of my friends are the same as me. This is what we do. no, it's impossible, like, you're so well educated and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, yeah, well, this is the point. Ukrainians are very well educated, and this educated in many levels, yeah, and like not just academic, but this is the way society just works. And you know, I had this story that I'm not the one who remembers bad stuff for too long, you know, but I have this story that I always give as an example. I was in Denmark on a business trip, and I was sitting in some like breakfast place, just waiting for my, I think, grøt, it's called, like this very nice breakfast. And there was this gentleman, local gentleman. He started talking to me in Danish, and I was like, sorry, I don't speak Danish. And he's, well, where are you from? I'm like, I'm from Ukraine. But how can you be here? You're all poor. And I was like, well, I am here, and I'm sitting exactly the same spot as you are, yeah. But it was, for me, it was so striking, like that, and it was few years ago, like maybe 2019 or something, or 2018, and you're like, what are you talking about? You know, this, do you still have this prejudice that Ukrainians are poor Soviet people that, you know, eat potatoes and that's it? And I understood that, yes, that it still existed. So to see how Ukrainians not only fight in the war, they're resilient towards all of these stereotypes that existed, and they face it all the time. Trust me, when you, as Ukrainian in Europe, sometimes you feel physical pain because you're surrounded by Russian. You understand that, you know, you go to the gallery and there is Ukrainian painter who will be hanged near the Russian one, and it's breaking your heart all the time, but you need to be resilient towards it, because there is no other way around. You cannot just give up and say, okay, like, do whatever you want, I'm just staying here silently. And this is a big job to do on everyday basis.
That's interesting you should say that, because one of the videos that's not yet on the channel, but is going to go live shortly after yours, it needs a bit of extra editing, is actually an art history expert who's been trying to get Western art collections relabeled to decolonize Western galleries. But it's a big job, and there's an extraordinary amount of resistance actually to making changes, which kind of surprises me in the context of what's going on. Anyway, heads up to the audience. We are going to tackle art history as a subject with two sort of excellent speakers in the coming few days. Let's tackle this big issue there, because I had a whole load of questions, but I think we've leapt straight into what is quite a deep topic. And because you're in, you know, you're sort of in PR and communications, we're going to talk about the organizations you're part of in a minute. But let's tackle head on this idea of victimhood, the fact that Ukrainians do not want to come across as helpless victims. And in fact, it's not in their interest to do that, because, you know, they may get less support, may get less military support even, because if it's thought that Ukrainians are weak, helpless victims, then, you know, Russian propaganda can work on that. So, well, why should we arm them if defeat is inevitable, et cetera, et cetera? So how do you balance this in PR, projecting strength, but also making it clear that Ukrainians need support, you know, militarily and in other ways as well?
I can tell you that I think a lot of change since the first months, because in the first months of full-scale invasion, we started, was like first day, yeah, we started PR Army, and our main thing was to promote what really happening. Yeah, to show the reality, to let eyewitnesses speak, to let experts speak on what's going on. And I think the main thing here is people, because when you give someone who just witnessed a massive shelling, and this person is telling you that he, I don't know, he gave up everything and went to help neighbors and to work without helmets, without everything, to take these people out of the ruins, and you say to this guy, can you please speak to international media and explain your story, what's going on here? And I think this is the main thing, because you don't need to come up with anything else, because these people are there and this is what they want to speak about. There is nothing to, you know, to come up on top of it. And I think first few months, this was the main thing, because there was always new stories. Also, of course, you know, we all know that people like, something either very funny or something horrible to look after, like to watch. Yeah. So when, for example, Bucha happened, or Borodyanka happened, people just wanted to listen to stories. They just wanted to understand what was actually happening there. And all of these resilient stories of people who stayed there and who protected their children, who protected their livelihood. The same with Mariupol. Yeah, it was terrible stories, but people, when they came out, the only thing they wanted to say that the only way to stop it is to help Ukraine. There is no other way. And whatever horrible story I've been through, there is still many more Ukrainians who are going through this. And I think that first, like I would say half a year, this worked. But now, as we all know, there is this kind of war fatigue, and I think there is different ways to approach this, and to approach on different level. Like, it depends on who you're speaking to. If you speaking to general public, you always need to look for stories that, and we as PR Army, we basically offer stories to international journalists, and the journalists decide what stories to run. But we need to be very convincing. Yeah. And for example, the topic of deportations, yeah, which I think will go after, now is actually one of the main topics of continuing the support, because this is what needs to be understood, that these people we cannot give them up. So the thing about continue to be resilient, I think about continuing the help for Ukraine, it's about not just, I don't know, someone might think that, well, why do you need Crimea or blah, blah, blah. Well, there is more than 1 million Ukrainians are abducted and deported. What do you offer us to do with this? Do you offer us just to forget? And I think that with the war is going on, there is always new issues appearing. And I think this is what helps us to keep going and to keep balancing this kind of, there is the horrific truth about war. War is very dirty, it's blood, it's trenches, it's dirt, it's people dying, it's people losing everything. And there is another story that people are ready to continue doing this as long as it's needed, because there is just no other way. And I think that these two sides, like life and death, I would say, they're like always combining in whatever story you're telling about Ukraine.
And something you mentioned as well there is, on the one hand, there's sort of horror, something that's going to get people's attention, and Irpin, Bucha, and these other events certainly did that. They also helped to dispel a lot of Russian propaganda. I think Russian propaganda ceased to be effective in countries like the UK after those images came out. But an issue like the deportations is much more complex, isn't it? And doesn't have such an obvious solution. I mean, for me, it's surprising that it hasn't got more coverage, because for me, that is one of the most horrific aspects of the whole war. We've got an excellent video by a reporter called Dinara, which people should check out on the channel, an amazing sort of young Ukrainian reporter who talked about that topic. But do you think one of the problems in promoting awareness for the deportation story is that it is complicated? There's less evidence because those people who are missing, it's very difficult to get access to them where they are in Russia. And there's no obvious solution to get many of them back.
I think there is many sides to it. I think, first of all, again, this is not understanding exactly the Ukrainian context and the history of Russian-Ukrainian relationships, because this is not the first time that Russia is doing this. And this is, I think, goes more to understanding Russia than to understanding Ukraine. Because deportations has always been the planned policy of Russia. They've been doing it with many, many different countries. Yeah, they deported Crimean Tatars, they deported Germans, they deported Greeks, they deported Chechens, they deported people in Ichkeria, they deported Lithuanians, Latvians, Estonians, Poles, Belarusians, Ukrainians. And this is the same technique. They're doing it again. And this is a very good example, like very good source to understand actually how this authoritarian regime within Russia always approached the idea of occupation. For example, if you go back to World War II, yeah, and you can see how after the war, the world basically, I would say, allowed Russia to annex a lot of territories, but the world was exhausted. Yeah, it was impossible to deal with it. But this annexation happened and was possible because Russia implemented deportations. If you take, for example, Baltic countries, they deported president from Estonia. Like they did it to basically weaken the state and annex them, and no one could do anything with it. And they do the same here, and especially if you talk about deportation of children, they Russify them, they change their mentality. Why it's not covered that much? I think, first of all, that like really small amount of people understand what deportation is. They believe that they evacuated people. Well, what's wrong with it? We just evacuated people from war zone. And you're like, do you think that absence of choice is choice? It is not. People were not allowed to leave to their home country. They were allowed only to go to Russia. Secondly, like, what do you want from people who've been under constant shelling, for example, for 8 months? What do you want them to do? To be rational, to make decisions? And they're like, well, we cannot mix deportations and evacuation. No, we should not mix, but we should understand that it's one system. And I think also, like, maybe my journalistic colleagues will not appreciate what I will say now and probably further in our conversation today, is that journalists need to understand, and editors as well, that this old school idea of what is journalistic standard needs to be revised and needs to be changed. Because, for example, taking the second opinion from a propagandist country is not an opinion. And while you're trying to find two opinions, you can lose the truth. And I think this is what's happening with deportations, because I spoke personally to a lot of journalists about this topic, and they all want to speak to someone who is inside Russia. And I'm explaining to them, you want them to be killed. What is your idea? Why do you want to speak to them? Do you think that these people will tell you the truth? Or if they do tell you the truth, what's going to happen to them? Are you willing to take this responsibility? We're not talking here about, I don't know, vacation, yeah, like, or we're not talking about refugees going to Europe, to free countries. We're talking about Ukrainians in the aggressor's country, where we don't even know where they are in many cases. And you want to contact them and to find out the truth? You think they're enjoying their life? Like, for me, this is always, I find, outraging, because in our experience as well, there were cases when we were providing anonymous stories and journalists just publish them openly. And you understand that, like, while looking for clickbait, the truth is very often lost. And that's why I think deportations is so complicated to comprehend. I know there are great journalists who are working on this, but they're doing very deep investigations to go to the truth. But when it comes to something like more everyday coverage, like, there is not clear understanding of what they're dealing with. And that's why, like, I'm explaining this all the time. Yeah, I'm explaining them, like, well, you can even go to Russian sources. They're not even hiding this. You can see they're giving you pictures. They're giving you, okay, in this Romashka center in Rostov, we have 600 children. And you're like, well, okay, good to know, you know. And they're calling this charity. They're calling it like saving people. And I'm not surprised by their behavior, yeah. But I'm surprised that journalists still expecting something to be truthful coming from, I know, Russian government or people who are basically captured and deported to someone else's country. And for me, that's why I think it's taken so long for this topic to be covered more, because many people, like many journalists, are confused with it, and many people are confused as well. Even the one that been deported, they're confused. They're not always sure what happened, you know.
Yes, exactly. And of course they're in a sea of propaganda. Once they're on the Russian side, not only will they be surrounded by the people that they now live amongst, who are giving them alternative version of the truth, they're going to be living in a highly propagandized environment. So they're going to be disoriented. It takes an awful lot of strength to keep hold of your own narrative, your own truth, when you're surrounded by lies and misinformation. If you're like a 4, 5, 6, 9-year-old child, it's very, very difficult to do that. Well, the younger they are, the more easy it is to brainwash them. And it follows on from another very complex topic, which is filtration, because deportation and filtration are really two sides of the same coin. That is, sort of taking children, taking women out, basically abducting them. And if they happen to be with men, if they happen to be with other people from their family who Russia sees as a threat, if they look through their phones and find any pro-Ukrainian images, sentiments, statements, or any evidence that these people have been involved in civic institutions, local government, anything at all to do with administration and civil society, filtration essentially means most of those people are made to disappear, and then any children associated with them are essentially abducted. I mean, it's the sheer horror of what is going on that I think journalists have utterly failed to understand. But it's not without historical precedent, because this is exactly what Russia has done on numerous occasions. I mean, it came as a total shock to me when I spoke to a historian about the fact that Ukraine had its own 1917 revolution. It had its own sort of socialist revolution, which was quite distinct from the Bolshevik one. There were connections, but it was distinct. And then all of those revolutionaries, all of them, 100%, were liquidated when Stalin started to take back control. And then it followed on, the Holodomor followed hard on the heels of that, or in parallel with it. And I think it's this understanding that what Russia does is it comes in, it eliminates the cultural, educational, thinking elite, either through deportation or simply through destroying them. And it's done it over and over again in numerous countries. We haven't been listening, and I think we still fail to listen to those details.
Yeah, of course. And I think history here is crucial. Learning history and what's been going on here before, like 2022, is very important to understand. And sometimes even talking to my Ukrainian colleagues, for example, I really urge them and encourage them to read and to listen something that explains the historical background. And not only regarding Ukraine and Russia, it's, for example, Russia and Georgia. Sarkatvelo, I'm sorry, Georgian people. I promised myself not to call them in this, again, imperialistic name, which is should be different. All of this story with what's going on with Armenia, Azerbaijan, what's the part of, what is Russian role there? What's the Russian role in Afghanistan? What's Russian role in Iran, in Syria, like in all of these places? And I think only by understanding this, you can have a clearer picture of what Ukraine is going through and what we're actually fighting against. Because Russia is an evil, not just for Ukraine. It's something that always we're putting their little sticky hands in everything bad that was happening. Yeah, if you speak very easily. Yeah, like I was just not long ago listening to the story, to the book about Mossad. And it was very interesting to get to know that actually Russia was supplying at that point Syria and Iran with nuclear technologies, so they can build nuclear weapons and basically attack the West. And you're like, and destroy Israel, for example. And you're like, Well, great news, yeah. And after all of these, there is still this belief that Russia can be reliable. No, they cannot. And what they're doing now with filtration camps, of course, they did it before. This is NKVD idea originally, yeah, to put everyone in filtration, whatever filtration means. Yeah, because filtration basically means concentration camps. It's all almost the same. And what are you filtrating? Like, what are you trying to filtrate? And the fact that this is still the question that, well, maybe it's not that bad. People are just like, they just check their passports and stuff. This is Ukraine. Why is someone coming to our country and checking and filtrating us? What are you talking about? And that most of Ukrainians have, even in their family history, like someone was definitely deported at some point of history. Yeah. Many of my ancestors were called kurkul and were called like agents, where most of them died during Holodomor. And when you look even at the family history of one Ukrainian family, you can see how this destruction of identity was built. And when we managed to get to the fact, when we were very sure about who we are as Ukrainians, Russians are doing this again. But now in this very straightforward and brutal way, and also now it's not working because you cannot go back. Yeah, it's, you need to read to Machiavelli to understand that this kind of occupation is not working. Yeah, if you go to the country that do not want to see you there and who is completely different from you mentally and culturally, they will not be a part of your country. They will always resist, even if you take them by force. It will never stop, and you will fail eventually. And I think that Putin and his company should really read some Machiavelli, because even in Middle Ages, he already knew better than they do now.
It's called hearts and minds, I think, isn't it, in the Western sort of military doctrine there. Russia does not seem to really care about hearts and minds. It simply relies on brute strength. And when I want to turn to some of the amazing stories that you have worked on, so deportation obviously is one of them, but there are a whole range of fascinating stories that would be great to touch upon, where you've been trying to not just get the news out, but convey these stories in a way that sort of humanizes and reaches different audiences. And I think one of the interesting ones, of course, is bathtub agency. That is a way of showing what it's like to live and work as professional people under the conditions of war, and try to reach out to other professionals via LinkedIn and so on. Could you tell me a little bit about the genesis of that campaign, and then we'll go through some of the others as well?
Well, this is our partners. This is a very nice team of people called Curiosity. They offered us to do this because they've been helping out since the first months of war. I actually invited them to speak at my lectures for my students, to explain a little bit about how Americans see the war and how it's, how you can work with these, especially when it comes to donations for Ukraine, to help Ukraine. And then they did this basically by themselves, by including us as this kind of inspiration for them, that every day when they do their job, they think about us. They think about us who are going through this, who needs to hide in their basements, who needs to hide in bathtubs, especially the one who are in Ukraine and who need to go through these and keep doing the same and even more that our colleagues are doing in other countries. So when I was in Ukraine this fall, it's interesting to understand how, I could see how people from outside sees us. Yeah, like they cannot understand how we're capable to do all of this. Like there is no electricity, there is no internet, whatever. Yeah, but it's keep going and nothing ever stops. But it's funny because it was, I think, around May when some unknown British online media made this long investigation about Ukrainian information front. And many of my colleagues were mentioned there, and basically they said that we are the agents of NATO. I don't know why NATO and why not CIA, but somehow we were agents of NATO. And we're sitting there, you know, like with zero money on our bank accounts because everyone just left their jobs and just started volunteering. Like someone who is just like working under shelling, you know, and you're like, yeah, you know, yeah, okay. And this, I think this idea that still many people have, that somehow all of these information efforts that Ukraine are making, this is somehow programmed by Ukrainian government. Well, this is not. And I think that this Bathtub agency is an example of it. This is real people behind it, real people who are doing it every day, despite anything that's happening around, you know. And this is, I think this is gives the human side to this fight that we're doing with PR Army, for example.
I have to say, I hadn't seen that article, and I'm kind of glad that I didn't, because I think it would make my blood sort of boil. But the same accusation has been made, I think, far more loudly, hasn't it? When it comes to Maidan, there are still many people who claim that, you know, the Revolution of Dignity was run and organized by the CIA, and the CIA must wish they had that kind of power and influence, and they just don't, fortunately. The same is with this phenomenon of NAFO, which are the little Shiba Inu dogs. Tens of thousands of people now have profiles with these little avatars or icons on Twitter, and they go around sort of just trying to jump on Russian propaganda and sort of dismiss it using humorous memes, insults, and all sorts of stuff. But again, you know, the only thing that Russia and its agents and sympathizers can say is, oh, this is all, you know, this isn't organic. This isn't real people behind it. This doesn't express a kind of popular will. But I think anyone who thinks about it for sort of 5 seconds will realize it's just physically not possible to organize all of that stuff.
Yeah, and also it's actually the funny thing about it, that it's very easy to check whether it's a bot farm or it's real people. And so every time someone is speaking about it, like I really recommend them to I don't know, to talk to some, I don't know, marketing specialists who can explain them how it works, because it's very easy to check. And also the behavior, for example, if you take NAFO, yeah, the behavior of them is completely different than what you see from these billions of Russian accounts. Because, for example, I'm also coordinator Ukrainer, yeah, and Ukrainer in the first place, it's a media that make these very deep contextual stories about Ukraine in like 12 languages. And for example, we cannot, even with some, because it's also an NGO, yeah, so it's non-profit media, and when trying, for example, to promote some with some support from our, like from grants and stuff like this, we're trying to promote some of the stories in social media, we're always blocked. Even if we try to, for example, it was just a lady playing the anthem and we were blocked, or our YouTube is always downgraded because of attack of bots that constantly comes, or because the policy of social media. And again, you ask yourself a question, like why the policy works this way, that big bot farms can destroy completely reliable sources, and reliable sources are actually absolutely powerless, because only money they are solving stuff. Yeah, because of course, if we had millions of dollars to put on advertising, yeah, it probably would work. But for me, I find it very confusing, and I think that this war showing how all of these standards that we build up in social media or in media in general are not working anymore. And this idea that, for example, Ukrainians are using some, you know, sources of fighting information front. Well, no, this is me. I'm fighting the information front every day, and I'm doing what I can, and I'm doing my job also, yeah, because this is what my expertise laid in, and people just united to do this, and this is I think for Russians, this is absolutely unknown field. Yeah. And I think even for many Europeans, they do not understand this. They did not need this for a long time. This idea of civil society doing something together and uniting. And yeah, but there is many example information from, and I think each of them doing its part. And I'm grateful that even so many foreigners, for example, joined NEFO, and they're helping. I know there's many Polish people, and they're really trying to sometimes ridicule some of the speakers who trying to blame Ukraine or something like this. And I think it's also a great way to deal with it, because you cannot be rational on everything. Yeah, you just cannot be. You just need to show people that, come on, this is so absurd that Kafka would cry. Yeah, you really need to make something of it.
And is that just that unique characteristic that I think that really defines Ukraine as being distinct from Russia, and that is the ability to self-organize. And I think that's what you're talking about here, isn't it? Is people seeing a problem and taking the initiative to not necessarily solve it, but to experiment with methods to try and solve it or try to chip away at that problem. And I think, if anyone gets anything out of this channel at all, it is that I think as Europeans and in the US and the UK, I think we've forgotten that this is an essential lifeblood of democracy. That if people cease to be involved, you defer responsibility to other people. Those other people may not have such benign views, such generous and fair views on how your society should run. So you should never fully cede control and authority to other people who are going to solve all your problems. I think that is the huge lesson from this. And the various organizations you're working with are perfect examples of this. Not government funded, not government initiatives. You've gone out, you've pulled together expertise to try and resolve these problems in ways that you think are going to be effective, and many other people are doing it in other ways as well. I'd like to get a sense of how many people are involved, because we've mentioned a number of organizations. We've mentioned the PR Army, we've mentioned Ukrainer, and Where Are Our People? What kind of collective do you have here that make these things happen?
Yeah, just wanted to add one little thought to what's previously discussed, that I believed and always believed that democracy cannot be passive. Like passive society cannot live in democracy. I think that democracy requires you to be active. And we're not talking about, like everyone needs to go and change the world. It's being active around your little corner, being active about what's going on in your yard, what's going on with your neighbors, like what's your part in all of this. And I think that Revolution of Dignity taught us a lot, because I remember this moment. This is when it started somehow for me. I was younger at that point, but I was leaving just 10 minutes from Maidan. And here with one hand, I'm cooking sandwiches, and to bring it there. And with the other hand, I'm like, I have like chat on the chat, and there is like these spreadsheets, and there is I'm somehow coordinating cars for bringing medicine, and I don't even understand how it happened, why I'm doing this. And this is instead of working I was working in an advertising agency at that moment. We all just stopped working. We just started doing this, and like everyone's like, I don't know what's happening, but this is what you do. And I think like instead of like living your life of a young woman, I was sitting till 4 a.m. watching every live video from Maidan if I was not there. And this is the life that we led at that moment. And I think this brought us till where we are now, because all of these years, which I think is not very clear to global community, this is what we were doing. In Kiev, for example, if some restaurant put their terrace where they should not, trust me, people will solve this. And we never expect, government will come and solve it. No, people are gonna go to authority and say, like, what is this? Yeah, why is this happening? Are you corrupted? or maybe you just don't care. Yeah, so we will solve it. So there's gonna be the whole internet drama around this restaurant, and everyone will just cancel the restaurant and never will go there, and this is how Ukrainians work somehow. Yeah, and Ukrainer, if we go back to to your question, yeah, Ukrainer, I think it's best example of a platform that shows this side of Ukrainians. So it started in 2016 when the team started going on expeditions in different corners of Ukraine and recording videos, documentaries about people in these little villages, building some communities around them, or like farming, or producing building these little wineries, vineyards, or one of the most glorious stories is Valery. It's a man I think he was 79 when the team recorded him. He was living in this little village with like 30 houses, and he was building sculptures in his backyard, and he was also making paintings, and he was really trying to make this painting with the tree cypress, and he could not, because he'd never seen it. He'd never been abroad. He'd never seen it in real life. And the team was so fascinated with him that they collected money from people and took him to Greece and made a movie out of it. And was his first time abroad, and he managed to see the cypresses and finish his painting. But again, the underlying story on all of these, that it was possible only because Ukraine received visa-free with Europe at the same moment. Otherwise, this man might probably never have seen abroad. He have never go out of Ukraine. And I think Ukrainer is very, very unique project that managed to capture this, and since many years ago. And now during the full-scale war, it just have also this another layer of how the same society is dealing with what's going on now. And for example, expeditions where we were discovering Ukraine in more of the fascinating manner. Now it's expeditions to the occupied areas, where we explore how people survived the occupation, how they were resisting it. And this is the main idea, and it's called deoccupation. And I think deoccupation is, we want to write a book about it as well, because I think it's a whole concept. What deoccupation means. It's not just rebuilding houses. It's not just about taking your territory back. It's the whole process, mental process of being freed from all of this. And so Ukrainer has around 12 language versions, and we really try to do different stories for different countries. So it's really relates to people in different countries. So it's also a part of information front. It just has this kind of very important role in Ukrainian society as well, because people really trust Ukrainer. And whatever we do, we're really cautious about what we're saying to Ukrainians, because they really trust, I would say, our expertise on many topics. And if we talk about PR Army is exclusively the team of international communication experts. So we all worked on global markets, and many of us knew each other before just because we worked together, or we knew just from parties, and we just united around it, and it grew very fast to like 400 volunteers. And at some point it just became a complete mess, because you're just like, there is like 10 coordinators and 400 volunteers, and like you have no idea what to do with all of this. So this is when we transformed into NGO, from being just a volunteering organization with something random happening. We registered an NGO. We defined our directions of work. We defined what is strategic for us and strategic for Ukraine, and we keep going there. Now I think we have around 150 volunteers, and probably around 30 people who were involved all the time in the process. And Where Are People is a project within PR Army. It just has a little bit different idea, because PR Army mostly work on promoting Ukrainian voices, on promoting Ukrainian experts, eyewitnesses on different topics. And I would say that the main one are energy, for example, energy crisis, food crisis, eco-terrorism that Russia imposing on the world, and it's all of the sanctions, trade, like this very deep and complicated topics, and also history, culture. We really try to include these as much as we can. And deportations, it's a separate line that there is a big point to it in about lobbying this issue, and to go in first of all to decision makers and try to explain them that this is not a joke, this is not something that you can just ignore. It is not. And that's why we really, with Wherever People, we unite many organizations that, for example, collect war crimes and evidence, because we're not the human rights organization per se, so it's not our expertise, but we really unite with all of them, so we can basically all share information and all basically promote the same narratives and talk the same narratives, same messages, because it's very important that it really stays in the head of people who listen this. And there is other representatives. For example, there is Detector Media. They are the best one regarding propaganda, and I think they're actually the best one in the world regarding propaganda when it comes to tackling and understanding Russian propaganda. There is Let's Data. They're doing brilliant research and help the whole information front with understanding better how the context in different countries works, and what people are talking about, and who is talking about Ukraine, and what should be done with it somehow. And there are some little projects, like some kind of new media, like War Against War, that are doing different kind of creative videos. And we all try to unite somehow. Yeah, like, for example, I go to our partners and I say, okay, let's do something about the topic of deportation. And together we can do some videos, we can do some content, we can talk to some organizations, for example, inside Germany that, for example, Vice, that supports Ukraine. And we'll think about, okay, what we can do together here, or Razum for Ukraine in the US. We're thinking, okay, how we can, make an effect on decision inside American Congress together, and it is all like line by line, but you basically more or less know every person in every organization, because it's not that big. It's not millions of people. Yeah, it's like just one community that just spread around the world now. And I find it fascinating, because many of my students, for example, are in PR Army, and many of them are volunteering for Ukrainer. And I'm very proud that these kind of new generation of people, this is what they do. They join these kind of initiatives, and they are the force in it somehow. And yeah, so it's, shortly speaking, it's around this. Yeah, but in PR Army, there are my colleagues who are also coordinators, and we spend a lot of time just thinking, and I think this is the main job of information front, is to think. We're thinking about what, how, with whom, when, and this is an ongoing process that, like, I would say, never stops.
And it's the opposite of propaganda, isn't it? Because propaganda seeks to create alternative facts, to use that phrase that came out of the US a few years ago. What you're doing is leveraging and amplifying facts, aren't you? You're trying to take historical and current areas which are little understood or not explored enough, and you're really trying to kind of amplify them and get them into people's consciousness. So there's a world of difference between what you're doing and what Russian propagandists are doing. And that might seem like an obvious statement. I think it needs to be spelled out, though, because it's very easy for propaganda to say, oh, well, PR propaganda, it's the same thing. Yeah, it's totally different.
Yeah, because we're not, it's not like some narratives are coined and we all like, okay, we say these, because it's irrelevant and we don't need this. It's it's very clear when it comes to, Ukrainian poet Helena Kruk. This is, I think, the best short speech that I've heard since all of these months, like during all of these months, and she said that there is no metaphor when it comes to war. Yeah, and for me, I think this is the answer to this, because it's very black and white who is wrong and who is right here. And I don't see, like, when people are saying, okay, Ukraine is also doing propaganda, and I have just one question: why would we do this? What's the point of us doing propaganda when the truth is on our side? And also, what do you call propaganda? You know, because Churchill was also doing war propaganda during World War II to motivate people, you know, to not lose the morale. And, you know, you can call this propaganda as well, you know, okay. But then you cannot put it together with Russian propaganda, because this is completely different story. And again, you need to get into the context of what you're talking about. You're talking about propaganda as a way of lifting some kind of ideas, or in the way to basically damage someone else or the whole country in case of Russia. So for me, this just, you know, frustration is not an opinion. And if you're frustrated about, well, you know, Ukraine in every news, well, this is not an opinion. Yeah, this is just your choice. Yeah, you can do whatever you want with this. Yeah, you can turn off the TV and just stop watching it. Yeah, but trying to find an excuse to it that there is some, I don't know, secret lab where they, you know, build up propaganda narratives on the side of Ukraine is just not true. And, you know, as much as you can be frustrated about it, yeah, it's not becoming true because of it. So
when the reality is compelling, far more compelling than any fiction that could be created, I mean, it just means there's really no point in making it up. It's ineffective as well as, immoral. On the Russian side, however, there's a very different purpose. And I think people who equate PR, this kind of PR, to propaganda, fail to understand that Russia is trying to project a story which is totally at variance with reality. And they're trying to paint themselves as victims when actually they're aggressors. So you've got to look at the intent behind what you're doing and what Russians are doing. One is amplifying reality. The other is trying to, well, prevent people from seeing the reality. And it's a very different process.
Because, you know, you can, with what we do, for example, as Ukrainian or with PR Army, in a lot of ways, we're telling human stories, and there is no need on creating something on top of it. And you're correct. There is you don't need fiction when all of this is happening. And you also don't need to, you know, to come up with something new somehow, you know, every time. The only thing that we need to make sure is that people who are speaking, and for example, when we provide contacts of some eyewitnesses to journalists or to other organizations, that these people are not going to be pressured. Because there is very often, there can be a different story that come out of their mouths just because they were pressured and they were under stress. And and this is just wrong, yeah, and insensitive to do. And I understand that many journalists need to do this to come to some truth they're looking for. But for example, we as people who help them, we cannot allow to anyone to speak to our citizens like this. So I think it's more, I would say that something that might look like propaganda, this is more of a protectiveness of Ukraine, you know. It's like, yeah, just like if you want to talk about some, I don't know, for example, corruption, if you like, I know, international journalists who come to Ukraine during the biggest war in Europe since Second World War, and you decide to speak about corruption, which is like unrelated to anything that is going on, then what is your point? Yeah, what are you trying to achieve? You're just trying to play Russian card, yeah, with propaganda, because this is what they do. They're trying to build the idea that Ukraine is unreliable country, like fully corrupted and blah, blah, blah. And for me, there is always a question, okay, we as Ukrainians, we know about, we're trying to fight this. And this is what you should focus on. Tell the story how Ukrainians are actually fighting against corruption, or fighting against something that I don't know, happened to us even few decades ago, but it's not happening anymore because we're not taking it. And I think this is just, this is just wrong. This is just wrong to look for stories which are irrelevant, as well as to talk to speakers that are irrelevant. For example, I love this example when, I don't know, someone decided to invite Noam Chomsky to speak about Ukraine. And you're like, why did you decide to speak to Noam Chomsky about Ukraine? Well, it's not just because, I don't know, he's might be wrong. It's just about he's irrelevant. Why is he an expert on Ukraine?
Why not Timothy Schneider? I mean, a much better choice to put questions
no, but I want to go to talk to a very well-known pacifist who is against every war and every, even after 9/11. Like, if you look at his position, it actually did not change much. And it's his choice. He can do whatever he wants with his opinion, like it's a free world. But why did you, as a journalist, for example, decide that he is a good speaker about Ukraine? Well, he is not. The same way you can like to speak to Henry Kissinger, and you're like, why? Like, go talk to him about Indonesia. Why are you not asking him about Indonesia and East Timor? Ask about this, because this is where he was involved. Why are you deciding to speak about Ukraine to the guy who has nothing to do with independent Ukraine, who knew it in a different times? And like
Mearsheimer's another one like that.
Or Mearsheimer, he's like going to these Indian channels and just like talking absolute nonsense. And like, for me, it's not about even being propagandist. This is about being absolutely irrelevant. And I think that people who are inviting them, they need to understand that actually they're the one who supports Russian propaganda by inviting these people. Because whatever Noam Chomsky is saying, it's his opinion, he's entitled to it. But why do you decide to invite him? This is a question. And if you really do not want to speak to Ukrainians, there are many other people who actually are experts in this, And like, for me, it's always goes back to very, I think, very human thing. I think like many people just have their egos are just too big to understand that they're wrong, And like, when you tell them this is wrong, and they were like, well, I know better, and you're like, well, okay, then I will just do my best so everyone know that everything that you do cannot be trustworthy, And somehow it's like, sometimes it's working actually, because I had many conversations with like huge media, but I was telling them, okay, I really do not like how you change your stories. Why do you speak to Russians so much? And why then you ask me to give you Ukrainian speakers, want to speak about Russia, speak about Russia. Yeah, we have nothing to do with it. And then they were like, sorry, like they start to, because it's not because we say it, and then every Ukrainian fixer say the same to them. And then Ukrainian journalists say the same to them. And this is, I think, the only way to affect what's going on in the media sphere. You need to speak about it. Every time when you, for example, refuse an award because there is Russian there and you don't speak about it, this is wrong. You need to explain very precisely why it's wrong. And it doesn't matter whether people want to listen to you or not, but this is your role. As Christopher Hitchens once said, there is never a good moment to keep your mouth shut, And I really think so. I think that especially now during this big war, I understand that like I'm not ready to take any kind of in betweens. Like, I'm really going for it, And I think this is what war teaches you. You just like, well, what else can happen? What else will they do? Somehow it's like it makes you very courageous in different levels.
Well, that leads into my last question absolutely perfectly, because I know we're almost out of time, and that is the fact that one key characteristic of this war has been the fact that so many women, so many strong female personalities have come to the fore. Thinking in particular of the Nobel Prize winner, Alexander Matvichuk, but there are many, many, many other examples. And of course, you're a good example as well of someone who just won't keep their mouth shut and won't be silenced, and won't just bow down to another point of view when it's incorrect. But seriously, how important really has been the role of women, and incredibly strong, expert women with, as you say, strong voices, who many of whom, have excellent English as well, which is also a prerequisite for getting your message across in the international media.
We have a joke inside Ukrainer that like every time we need to find someone in the team, and the founder of Ukrainer is Bogdan Lohanenko. Yeah, he's a man. Yeah, and every time we hire someone new, it's always a woman. And like sometimes, when I speak about, I need to hire a PR manager, I do it in feminative. Yeah, it's like, yeah, so we don't even consider men. Yeah, and it's somehow our internal joke, because somehow that so many men are in the front line, and so many women are just like finding any possible way to be present and to promote and to do as much as they can, of course, as everyone. Yeah, like it doesn't depend on gender, but here, because many, I think like 30% of women are actually in Ukrainian army now, and it's a huge amount of women. And also you can see there is all of these roles around army that are actually also taken by women. For example, the whole school that teaches people to use drones for it's led by women. There is so many volunteer organization led by women. And when it comes to information front, I think what's important to understand that many for example, many women that I work with, their husbands are on the front line. And it's this sense of, I don't know how to call it, this sense of dignity that they have, that they never speak about. Yeah, they never speak about how they worry about their husbands. No, they never use this. This is not a subject. It's just such an intimate idea, when the whole family is involved in this in some level. And sometimes women just need to take a step, for example, to stay home and do something what they can from home while their husbands are on the front line, and or leave Ukraine, for example, to keep children safe when their men are on the front line. And I think this is there's so many levels to, I think, women in this war. And I think also one of the sides is that the world can actually see that Ukraine is not that stereotypical, old school country, that women here are on top of everything. Yeah, like they're everywhere, and there is no question about it. Yeah, there's no problem with it. And I think this is also a very important thing to explain and to see, that it's not something that Russia was trying to, to scare people, the world, with, that Ukraine is like this, closed tribal society with some, old school principles. Well, this is not true.
And I think that's to sort of end on, I think that's one of the extraordinary characteristics, but also it's something which I think people will understand and appreciate from the parallels in the Second World War in Britain, because the female population in Britain had a huge change in the status in society, and the kind of jobs which would have been absolutely not considered, within the female ability, driving buses, trains, tractors, etc. Suddenly you don't have the workforce, and you have to. Britain, however, after the war, sort of slipped back, and some of those gains then sort of slipped back in the late 40s and 50s, and it took another couple of decades for people to then come and accept again that women were capable of doing pretty much all the jobs that men can do. It's important, isn't it, that Ukraine doesn't slip back into a pre-war. But I get the impression you're already far more you know, women had a far more
Yeah, you know, I never
sophisticated role.
I might be here not, you know, I'm not really an expert on the topic of equality. Yeah, I know there is many things that need still to be improved in Ukrainian laws, yeah, regarding this. But to be honest, I grew up with a very strong like female role models, and my late dad, he was a housewife, yeah, I would say. Like, he was cooking, like he had a job, but he was like, you know, he was enjoying like cooking, spending time with children. And my mom always did something. She had her businesses, like little businesses, or like she was doing this and that and that and that, you know. And she actually remarried during because my dad died like several years ago, and she remarried during this war with power shortages, you know, like in, you know, with scandals. And this is kind of women I grew up with. And there was nothing like, you know, this idea, oh, you cannot do it. Yeah, it's like, just do whatever you want, you know. And I think this is maybe I'm just different generation, you know, because I'm still just in my early 30s. But I don't think that really Ukraine is the country where inequality is somehow were such a huge issue. It is issue, I think, on the institutional level, because the laws are not as good in protecting like women or like LGBTQ, for example, as it is in Europe or in America. But just recently, for example, there was a new law about national minorities in Ukraine, which might not be perfect, but I also think that it's a very good example of how Ukraine, even during the worst war, is still trying to improve on this democratic level, because this is a law that protects women, the law that protects LGBT, the law that protects national minorities are important. And we took us long to get there and to start changing it. But I think that the fact that we're doing it even now is crucial in understanding Ukraine, because civil society never sleeps. Yeah, we never stop. We're like, you know, what about our national minorities? What about indigenous population? What about Crimean Tatars? Where's our Karaims? What are we gonna do with this? You know, and this is, yeah, this is how, you know, we're all. And I think with women is similar, because you know, we never stop thinking about these issues in Ukraine. Yeah, if we do have one, but now there is such I believe this again, some feeling of intimate understanding of what is the role of man now, because they cannot leave the country, and what is the role of women. And for me, I cannot call it equal. Yeah, I cannot equal something when, for example, men are not allowed to leave. But again, I do not see what else could have been done. How could we do it in a different manner? And that's why I think women, all Ukrainian women, have this feeling, and they have this feeling of responsibility also for all of the men and women who are on the front line, because someone who were not there, we have this kind of, you know, we need to do our best. So all of these people, as much of them will be alive, you know, and will come back. And I think this is this very, you know, factor that unites us all the time as well.
Well, Anastasiia, it's been an incredible pleasure speaking to you. There is so much detail that potentially, you know, in a future conversations we can unpack and explore, because we've covered an amazing amount of topics. And you know, as someone in marketing, I'm actually intrigued about how, you know, all these PR campaigns work. So we'll definitely catch up again, I think, in future. But I wanted to thank you for talking about all of these topics, and can only hope that, you know, the strength and evolution of Ukraine continues to the point of victory. And Slava Ukraini.
Героям слава.